Emily Carter walked through the large door of the Winters mansion with cold hands. She never thought she would enter here as the master, not as a servant. The hostile eyes of the Winters family were on her like sharp blades, especially Nathan and Isabella. They could not accept the fact that their father, Richard Winters, had left all his assets to a poor orphan like Emily. Her breathing became heavy when lawyer Daniel Hayes placed the document in front of her. According to the legal will of Mr. Richard Winters, his entire estate shall belong to Emily Carter. The whole room fell into a dead silence before Isabella let out a snort. "What a stupid joke! A servant like you has no right to inherit." Nathan slammed his hand on the table, his cold eyes filled with hatred. "What did you do to my father? Did you seduce him, or did you manipulate him when he was not in his right mind?" His voice was filled with contempt. Emily felt her head spinning. She didn't know how to explain. She didn't want this. She was just an orphan who grew up in this house, serving them since she was a child. But now, she had become their #1 enemy. Margaret Winters, the powerful and proud woman, stared at her, her eyes sharp as if piercing her soul. "You are not my daughter, nor a Winters. You are not worthy." Emily clenched her hands into her palms to keep her composure. She had been despised all her life, but this time she couldn't back down. "I didn't want this either. But this is Mr. Winters' decision. If you want to challenge the will, let the lawyers handle it." Nathan smirked, but his eyes flashed dangerously. "I won't let you off the hook, Emily." Emily didn't say anything more. She knew that from this moment on, she was the target of those who didn't want her in this house. The following days passed in extreme tension. Emily lived in a beehive of intrigue. The servants in the house suddenly became cold to her, clearly manipulated by Margaret. Dinner with the Winters family was like a psychological war. Nathan and Isabella constantly attacked her, and Margaret tried to trap her into making mistakes. But Emily was not the weak girl she used to be. She knew that if she showed any sign of weakness, they would tear her apart immediately. Nathan seemed unwilling to give up. He hired a team of private investigators to find anything that could ruin Emily's reputation. But when he couldn't find anything, he decided to play a more dangerous game. Late one night, while Emily was reading the inheritance documents in her room, the window suddenly opened by a strong wind. A small piece of paper flew into the room. She picked it up, her eyes trembling as she read the short words, "Leave this house, or you will regret it." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. Emily clenched the paper in her hand, her heart pounding. Someone wanted her out of here. She could guess who was behind this, but she had no concrete evidence. A knock came suddenly, startling her. "Come in." Her voice was a little shaky. The door opened, and Daniel Hayes walked in. He was the only person in the house who didn't treat her like an enemy. "Are you okay?" he asked. His eyes filled with concern. Emily nodded, but couldn't hide her tension. "What's wrong?" Daniel pulled up a chair in front of her, placing a stack of documents on the table. "I just got the news. Nathan has hired his own lawyer to try to invalidate the will. He's trying to prove that Mr. Winters was not of sound mind when he wrote it." Emily sighed, feeling like a boulder was pressing down on her chest. "I expected this. He won't give up easily." Daniel nodded. "The thing is, they're going through Mr. Winters's medical records. If they find any signs that he was mentally ill or under duress, they can invalidate the will." Emily frowned. "But Mr. Winters was perfectly sane when he decided to leave me his fortune. I don't know why he did it, but I know he's not crazy." Daniel stared at her, as if considering something. "There's something I've wanted to ask you for a long time. Have you ever thought that Mr. Winters might be your real father?" Emily was stunned. "What are you talking about?" Daniel leaned back, his eyes sharp. He treated you so differently for a servant. He not only gave you an education, but he always protected you from the cruel treatment of this family. Now he's leaving you all his assets. Isn't that a little strange? Emily felt her blood freeze. She had never thought of it that way. No, no way. Daniel studied her. If it's true, you can legally keep this property without anyone being able to dispute it. But if it's not, you need to prepare for a difficult legal battle. Emily clenched her fists. I don't want the money. I just want to find out why he did it. Daniel sighed softly. Okay, I'll continue investigating, but you need to be careful. I don't think Nathan is just looking for a lawsuit. He's a ruthless man. Emily looked down at the warning note in her hand. She knew Daniel was right. The next morning, when Emily walked down to the dining room, the entire Winters family was already there. The air was tense. Nathan smirked coldly. Oh, you finally came down for breakfast? I thought you were scared and ran away. Emily kept her composure. I have no reason to run away. This is my home. Isabella chuckled. Look, our maid is calling herself the Mistress now. Margaret put down her teacup, her voice low but authoritative. You don't really think you can keep everything without resistance, do you? Emily raised her head. I know everyone will do anything to get it back, but I won't give up easily. Nathan gritted his teeth, his eyes filled with hatred. You'll regret not leaving here in the first place. Emily looked straight into his eyes. I've been humiliated enough. If you want to fight, then try. Margaret stood up, her face expressionless. Then we'll see who wins. She left the table. Isabella stood up as well, but before she left, she leaned down and whispered in Emily's ear. You don't know who you're up against, you poor little mouse. Emily didn't respond, but in her heart, she knew that the real battle had only just begun. Emily walked out of the dining room with a steady stride, but she still felt uneasy. She knew she was on the front lines against people who would do anything to regain control. As she climbed the stairs, a soft but meaningful voice rang out behind her. Do you really think you can fight this whole family? Emily turned to see Isabella leaning against the railing, a sinister smile on her face. Emily crossed her arms, trying to keep her tone calm. You think I can't? Isabella walked slowly down the stairs, her brown eyes calculating. You don't understand how the world works, Emily. You may have money, you may have fame, but you're still a poor girl from the bottom of society. Emily clenched her fists, but she didn't let her emotions show. If I'm just a servant like you say, why do you feel so threatened that you have to stand here and convince me to back down? The smile on Isabella's lips stiffened, but she quickly regained her composure. I don't feel threatened. I just want to warn you. Nathan isn't the type to play fair. He can go further than you think. Emily raised an eyebrow. Are you worried about me? Isabella laughed, her voice sharp. Worried about you? Don't be silly. I just want you to know that if you continue down this path, the consequences will be painful. Emily kept her gaze hard. I'm not easily intimidated. Isabella tilted her head, her eyes flashing with interest. Then we'll see who wins. She left, leaving Emily standing alone on the stairs, wary. That night, Emily lay in her room, staring at the ceiling. She couldn't sleep. Anxiety ate away at her. She had been invisible in this house. Now she was at the center of a family feud. A cold wind blew into the room, making her shiver. She looked toward the window, still closed. But the strange feeling didn't go away. Suddenly, a small rattle came from the door. Her heart clenched. Someone was standing outside. She sat up slowly, holding her breath as she listened. The rattle came again. She clenched the sheets tightly, fear creeping into her every fiber. Someone was trying to open her door. She stood up cautiously, walking softly to the door. She put her hand on the knob and yanked. The door swung open, but the hallway was empty. A cold wind blew. But that wasn't what scared her. On the floor in front of her door was an old photograph. Her hands trembled as she bent down to pick it up. It was a black-and-white photograph of a young man and woman. Her heart nearly stopped when she realized the woman in the photograph was her mother, and the man standing beside her, Richard Winters. Emily felt her blood run cold. The next morning, Emily went straight to the room of Mr. Reynolds, the Winters' faithful butler. The old man looked at her calmly, but when he saw the photograph in her hand, his face paled. Emily held the photograph out to him. "You know something, don't you?" Mr. Reynolds sighed, his eyes heavy. "I thought you'd find it sooner or later." Emily swallowed. "Please, tell me the truth." Mr. Reynolds looked deeply into her eyes, then lowered his voice. "Richard Winters is your biological father." Emily's world seemed to shatter. She took a step back, her mind reeling. "No, it can't be." Mr. Reynolds nodded. "I've kept this secret for years. Mr. Winters loved your mother, but because of family pressure, he couldn't marry her. When you were born, he arranged for you to live near him, but he couldn't acknowledge you publicly." Emily felt as if someone had just sucked all the air out of the room. "So, he knew I was his daughter all along?" Mr. Reynolds nodded slowly. "And that's why he left you all his money." Emily sank back into her chair, her mind blank. She had always wondered why Richard Winters was so kind to her. Why did he protect her when everyone else saw her as scum? Now she had her answer. But that meant she had just taken everything from Nathan and Isabella in a way they could never forgive. They wouldn't just be angry. They would seek to destroy her. Emily sat motionless, her hands gripping the photograph so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The truth was too much for her to process at once. She had lived all these years in this house, despised, without knowing that she was part of the Winters bloodline. She looked up, staring straight at Mr. Reynolds. "Why didn't he tell me? Why did he let me live like a lowlife when I was supposed to be part of this family?" The old butler sighed. "Richard Winters wanted to protect you. He knew that if he took you in, Margaret would never let him go. She would do anything to get rid of you, just as she did with the others who threatened her position in this family." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. "Others?" Reynolds looked at her warily. "Not everyone knows this, but Richard Winters had another son, before you. He knew the truth about who he was, and then mysteriously disappeared." Emily froze. "You mean he was murdered?" Reynolds didn't answer right away. "I don't have proof, but people who challenge the Winters family rarely come to good ends." Emily swallowed. If that was true, then she wasn't just fighting for her inheritance. She was putting her life in danger. That night, Emily sat in Richard Winters's study, which had remained untouched since his death. She knew Nathan and Isabella would never accept the truth. If they found out she was Mr. Winters's biological daughter, they would do everything they could to get rid of her. Her phone rang. It was Daniel Hayes. "Emily, you need to come down now. Nathan has called an emergency meeting of the company's shareholders. He's trying to regain control." Emily's grip on the phone tightened. "I'll be there soon." She was no longer a servant. She was Emily Winters, the rightful heir, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that away. At the Winters Enterprises conference room, Emily walked into the tense conference room where all the important shareholders were present. Nathan sat at the head of the table, his face cold, while Isabella crossed her arms arrogantly. Nathan stood up, his voice loud but sharp. I called this meeting to discuss the chaos the company is facing due to an outsider controlling my family's assets. He turned to look at Emily. She has no right to run Winters Enterprises. Emily kept her composure, sitting down in the opposite chair. According to the legal will, I am the heir of Richard Winters. Therefore, I have full control of this company. Nathan laughed mockingly. You think you can run a billion-dollar corporation just because of a piece of damn paper? You don't know anything about business. You're just a poor girl that my father pitied. Emily was unfazed. Yes, I have never learned how to run a large company. But I am willing to learn, and the first thing I learned is to never let a traitor control the company's finances. She pushed a stack of documents onto the table. Shareholders, I have investigated and discovered that Nathan has been embezzling company funds, laundering money through fake investments. Here is the evidence. The room exploded. Some shareholders whispered to each other. Some looked at Nathan suspiciously. Nathan's face paled for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. You're lying! Emily shrugged. I asked Daniel to investigate and have legal evidence. If you want, I can call the police right now. The oldest shareholder in the room, Mr. Walter Barnes, tapped the table. Nathan, if this is true, then you will lose your entire position in the company. Nathan gritted his teeth, glaring at Emily as if he wanted to kill her on the spot. Margaret Winters, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. Her voice was icy cold. We will not let a servant destroy the Winters empire. Emily held her ground. I am not destroying. I am just taking back what is mine. Isabella gritted her teeth, but Margaret quickly pulled her back to her seat. Walter Barnes sighed. Let us take a vote. Who agrees to let Emily Carter take over Winters Enterprises according to Richard Winters's will? Hands rose slowly. 1, 2, 3. Nathan glared at the shareholders who had betrayed him. He stood up, slamming his hand on the table. You bastards! Walter glared at him with a sharp gaze. Nathan Winters, you are officially stripped of your control of the company. Emily clenched her fists. She had won, but she knew that the real battle was not over yet. That night, Emily stood on the balcony of the Winters mansion, looking down at the vast garden. The wind blew coldly, but not as cold as the feeling in her heart. Footsteps echoed behind her. You did it, Daniel's deep voice rang out. Emily turned around. But I know Nathan won't stop. He'll do anything to get revenge. Daniel nodded slightly. That's right. But I'll always be by your side. Emily looked deep into his eyes. She knew she couldn't trust anyone in this family. But with Daniel, she wasn't sure anymore. She stepped closer to him, her voice soft. Daniel, if one day I find out you're hiding something from me too, should I trust you? Daniel was momentarily stunned. Something flashed in his eyes, but then he smiled. Emily, there are secrets that are best left unsaid. Emily was still standing on the balcony, the cold wind blowing her hair. Daniel's words echoed in her mind. Some secrets are best left unsaid. She looked at him, trying to read something in his eyes, but Daniel kept his face calm. There was something he was hiding from her, and she didn't like it. You're hiding something, aren't you? Emily asked bluntly, her eyes shining with suspicion. Daniel just smiled, but his smile was mysterious. We all have secrets, Emily, but there are things you're not ready to know. Emily clenched her fists. I lost everything to get here, Daniel. I don't want to be fooled again. Daniel moved closer, his voice warm but a little warning. Then be careful of those around you, especially Nathan. He won't let you get away with it. Emily took a deep breath. She knew Nathan was the biggest threat. He had lost everything, and now he would stop at nothing to get it back. The next morning, at the Winters mansion, Emily walked down to the living room, preparing to leave to meet the shareholders. As she walked through the front door, she noticed a black car parked right in front of the gate. Nathan stood there, leaning against the car with a dangerous smirk. "Do you really think you've won, Emily?" he said, his voice low and sharp. Emily kept her composure. "I don't have time to listen to your threats, Nathan." He stepped closer, his eyes darkening. "This isn't a threat. It's a warning. You have no idea what you're getting into." Emily glared at him. "I'm not afraid of you." Nathan laughed, but there was a dangerous undercurrent in his laugh. "You should be scared, because you're not just taking my money, but the truth that you don't know." She frowned. "What are you talking about?" Nathan stepped closer, whispering in her ear. "Your father isn't as good as you think, Emily. He has a lot of secrets. And if you keep digging, you won't like what you find." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. She couldn't let him sway her. "I don't believe you," she said, her voice firm. Nathan smirked. "We'll see." Emily returned from the shareholders' meeting, Nathan's words still echoing in her mind. She walked into the library, where Richard Winters had spent most of his time while he was alive. She opened the drawers of her desk, searching for anything that might help her understand her father's past. Suddenly, her hand touched a thick, carefully sealed envelope. She opened it. Inside were a series of papers, medical records, and a handwritten letter. "If someone is reading this, it means I can no longer keep this secret." Emily swallowed, continuing to read. "Nathan is not my biological son." She was stunned. "He's not a Winters. Margaret lied to me, and when I found out, there was nothing I could do but keep pretending. But I always knew that someday he would find out." Emily's head spun. What did this mean? Nathan wasn't Richard Winters' biological son. She flipped through the other papers. There was a DNA test, confirming that Nathan and Richard Winters were not related. She sank into her chair, feeling like her whole world had turned upside down. If Nathan found out, he would go crazy. Elsewhere in the mansion, Nathan sat in his private study, staring at an old photograph. Inside the frame was a strange man, the man he had always believed to be his biological father. His phone rang. He picked it up. Margaret's voice came from the other end. "Have you figured it out yet?" Nathan gripped the phone tightly. "You know everything. Mom lied to you all your life." Margaret was silent for a moment before answering, her voice low. "Then you know what to do." Nathan closed his eyes, his fists clenched until they were white. "Yes, I know." In the middle of the night, in Emily's room, Emily woke with a start to a noise outside her window. She got out of bed, opened the curtains, and saw a figure standing silently in the dark garden. The figure stood still, as if watching her. She felt her heart pounding. Someone was watching her. Just then, her phone vibrated. A text message from an unknown number appeared on the screen. "You don't deserve to be here. Get out before it's too late." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. Emily stared at the phone screen, her heart pounding in her chest. The threatening text wasn't just a warning. It was a declaration of war. She pulled the curtain shut, standing still in the darkness, feeling distinctly that someone was watching her. But she couldn't show fear. This was her home, and she wasn't going to let anyone push her away from it. She quickly dialed Daniel's number. He picked up almost immediately. "Emily? What's wrong?" His voice was hoarse, as if he'd just fallen asleep. "Daniel, someone's following me. I just got a threatening text. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line before Daniel spoke again, his tone serious. Did you see anyone? Emily glanced out the window again, but the figure was gone. No, but I know someone's out there. Did you lock your door? Emily quickly checked the door and windows. Okay. Okay, don't leave the room until I get there. I'll be right there. Emily hung up, feeling a little relieved. But as she went back to bed, a sense of unease crept into her. Nathan and Margaret weren't going to stop, and she needed to be ready for that. The next morning, Emily sat in Richard Winters's office, her eyes glued to Nathan's file. She'd been up all night studying it, and the more she learned, the more she shivered. Richard Winters had known Nathan wasn't his biological son for years, but instead of revealing the truth, he'd kept it a secret. Why? She flipped through the old notes and unexpectedly found another letter. A letter from Richard Winters himself to Margaret. Margaret, I know the truth. I know Nathan is not my son, but I will not say it. I am tired of your schemes. If you continue to seek to destroy what I have built, I swear I will not stand by. I have my true heir, and there is nothing you can do to change that. Emily took a deep breath. The true heir was her. Richard Winters had been preparing for this day, but he hadn't seen it coming. There was a knock on the door. Come in. Daniel entered, a file in his hand. I've been looking into Nathan and Margaret, and you'll want to see this. He set the file down on the table. Emily opened it. Inside were Nathan's secret bank records. Her eyes widened. He's moving money overseas? Daniel nodded. Yes. I think he's planning something big, and I don't think he'll leave you alone, Emily. Emily clenched her fists. We need to know what he's up to. I'm not going to let him destroy everything I have. Daniel stared at her, a flicker of worry in his eyes. Emily, he doesn't just want his money back. He wants to destroy you. Elsewhere in the mansion, Nathan sat in his study, his eyes dark as he stared at his computer screen. He had lost everything. His company, his fortune, his place in society. And it was all Emily Carter's fault. He slammed his glass against the wall, his breathing heavy. The door opened, and Margaret walked in. She was dressed in an elegant black dress, her face as calm as ever. You need to calm down, Margaret said, her voice soft but commanding. Nathan spun around. Calm down? You want me to calm down when I'm being humiliated like this by a servant girl? Margaret stepped closer, placing her hand on her son's shoulder. My dear son, don't let your emotions rule you. We'll get it back, but we have to be smart. Nathan gritted his teeth. What's your plan? She smiled. Of course, Mom has planned this for a long time. Not only will we get the company back, but we'll make Emily disappear forever. Nathan smirked. Then let's do it. 3 days later, Emily was sitting in the Winters Enterprises office, preparing for an important meeting with the shareholders, when her phone rang. An unknown number. She hesitated for a few seconds before picking up. Hello? A deep voice came from the other end of the line. If you want to know the truth about your father, come see me tonight. Alone. 9 a.m., warehouse 12. Docks. Emily's heart pounded. Who is it? I'm the only one who can help you. But if you tell anyone, you'll never know the truth. She hesitated. This could be a trap. But if someone really did know the truth about Richard Winters, she couldn't ignore it. Okay, I'll be there. She hung up, a feeling of unease rising in her heart. Night fell, shrouding the city in a blanket of fog. Emily drove to the docks, her mind a jumble of curiosity and fear. She knew this could be a trap, but if there was a chance to learn the truth about her father, she couldn't pass it up. The car stopped in front of Warehouse 12, an old building, abandoned for years. There were no lights, only the sound of the wind whistling through the iron walls. She stepped out of the car, her excitement rising little by little. Suddenly, there was a noise behind her. Emily spun around, but saw no one. "Calm down, Emily," she told herself. But her palms were already sweating. She stepped into the warehouse, the faint light from the street lamp outside casting long, eerie shadows. "Is anyone here?" she asked, trying to stay calm. There was no answer. She walked deeper inside, her high heels clicking loudly on the cold concrete. Suddenly, the warehouse door slammed shut behind her. Emily jumped, her heart sinking. And then, a familiar, deep voice spoke from the darkness. "You were really stupid to come here alone." "Emily?" "Nathan." Emily turned around and saw Nathan Winters stepping out of the darkness, a sinister smile on his lips. "You're too confident, Emily," Nathan said, his hands in his pockets, his gaze cold. Emily held her ground. "You set this up, didn't you?" Nathan shrugged. "Not really. I just created the opportunity for you to come in. It's up to you to go or not." Emily gritted her teeth. "What do you want?" Nathan laughed. "What do you think? I want everything you took from me." She didn't flinch. "I didn't take anything. Your father left me his fortune." Nathan's eyes darkened. "My father?" he chuckled. "It's interesting that you still call him that." She stared at him. "You know the truth, don't you?" Nathan clenched his fists. "I've known for a long time, Emily. I've always suspected. And then, when I found the DNA profile, my suspicions became true." Emily swallowed. "Then why are you pretending?" Nathan stepped closer to her, his eyes flashing with hatred. "Because I want to see you fall. I want you to think you've won, only to find out that you never really belonged in this world." Emily clenched her fists. "I don't care about your power play. Nathan, I just want the truth." Nathan curled his lips. "Are you sure? Sometimes the truth is more cruel than a lie." She took a deep breath. "Tell me." He stared at her for a long moment before speaking slowly. "Richard Winters didn't just hide the truth about me. He also hid another secret. About your mother." Emily's heart pounded. "What are you talking about?" Nathan sneered. "Who do you think your mother is? An innocent woman, abandoned by my father?" "No, Emily. She's not who you think she is." Emily felt every muscle in her body freeze. Nathan stepped closer, leaning close to her ear and whispering, "Your mother is a murderer." She stepped back, her eyes wide. "You're lying," Nathan chuckled. "I have proof. You never really knew your mother, Emily. And if you want to find out the truth, be prepared to face things you never imagined." Before Emily could react, a pair of rough hands suddenly grabbed her from behind. She screamed, but a cloth soaked in anesthetic was pressed tightly against her mouth. Her breathing became heavy, her mind spinning. She saw Nathan standing there, arms crossed, his smile full of satisfaction. "Good night, Emily." She tried to resist, but her vision blurred. And then darkness enveloped everything. In a secret mansion, Margaret Winters sat on a luxurious leather chair, sipping a glass of red wine. She did not appear nervous, but on the contrary, her expression was frighteningly calm. The door opened, and Nathan walked in, followed by two strange men dragging Emily, who was still unconscious. Margaret put down her glass, looking at her son with sharp eyes. "Good job," Nathan chuckled. "What do you want to do with her?" She stood up, walked closer to Emily, and looked down at her with contempt. "It's time for this girl to disappear." Nathan frowned. "Are you going to kill her?" Margaret shrugged. If necessary. Nathan clenched his fists. I want her to suffer more than that. I want her to lose everything, the way she took it from me. Margaret looked at her son, then smiled wickedly. Then we'll do it your way. She gestured to the two men. Lock her up. We'll have her on her knees before this is over. Nathan gave Emily one last look before turning away. Emily slowly came to, her head spinning, her mouth dry. She tried to move, but found herself tied to a wooden chair, her hands tied behind her back. The room was dimly lit, and the smell of mold filled her nostrils. It took a few seconds for her consciousness to return, and then memories flooded back. The docks, Nathan, the confrontation, and then darkness. She swallowed hard. Where was she now? The door opened, and Margaret Winters strode in, her manner more casual than a prison cell. You're finally awake, Margaret said, her voice authoritative and sharp. Emily tried to calm herself, keeping her tone firm. Do you think tying me up will change anything? Margaret smirked. You're still too young. Do you really think you can beat us just because your father left you his fortune? Emily clenched her fists, trying to hide her anxiety. I'm not afraid of you. Margaret leaned down, facing Emily, her eyes like knives cutting through her mind. You should be afraid. Emily, because you don't know who you're dealing with. Emily looked straight at her. You killed Richard Winters, didn't you? A dangerous glint flashed in Margaret's eyes, but she quickly regained her composure. You think I could do such a thing? He found out the truth about Nathan. He knew Nathan wasn't his real son, and you were afraid he would change the will. You couldn't let that happen, so you tried to kill him. Margaret laughed, but her smile was devoid of warmth. You're actually smarter than I thought, but knowing the truth, what can you do when you're tied to this chair? The door opened again, and this time it was Nathan. He stood with his arms crossed, leaning against the doorframe, looking at Emily with amusement. Welcome to hell, Emily, he said, his tone full of sarcasm. Emily took a deep breath, keeping her voice from shaking. What do you want from me? Nathan shrugged. I want to see you lose everything. I want you to feel betrayed, destroyed, abandoned, the way you did to me. You're delusional, Emily chuckled. I never took anything from you. You're not Richard Winters' biological son, that's true. I didn't do it. Nathan narrowed his eyes, his smile fading. But you took my place, and I'm going to take it all back. Margaret put her hand on her son's shoulder, her voice soothing. Don't rush, son. Let this girl see how wrong she was to confront us. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. She knew they wouldn't let her go easily. But she also knew one thing. She couldn't be broken. Somehow, she had to escape. And when she does, she'll come back and make them pay. Emily scanned the room, trying to remember every detail that might help her escape. Even though she was tied up, she didn't allow herself to panic. She knew that if they had intended to kill her now, they would have done so long ago. But Nathan didn't want her to die easily. He wanted her to suffer, to break before he finished everything. Margaret straightened, her eyes filled with contempt. You know what I hate most about you, Emily? Not because you took my family's fortune, but because you're so weak that you think you can win. Emily kept her gaze hard. You say I'm weak, but you're the one who's been hiding the truth all these years. Afraid that Richard would find out that Nathan wasn't your son. Afraid that he would leave everything to me. The only weak person here is you. A flash of anger flashed in Margaret's eyes, but she quickly regained her composure. You think the truth will help you? The truth is worthless if no one believes you. Nathan stepped closer, looking down at Emily. "You'll find out soon enough, Emily. When you have no one by your side, nothing in your hands, you'll understand what despair is." Emily smiled faintly. "I've lost everything once, Nathan. I'm not afraid of losing it again. But I think you're different. If people knew you were just an imposter, someone without the Winters bloodline, how do you think they would react?" Nathan narrowed his eyes, the smile on his lips suddenly disappearing. Margaret put her hand on his shoulder, as if to restrain her anger. "It's okay, son. Soon, this girl won't have a chance to say anything anymore." She turned to the subordinates standing near the door. "Take her away. It's time to show her what hell is." Emily struggled as two burly men grabbed her arms and dragged her out of the dark room. She didn't know where they were taking her, but she knew one thing. She couldn't let them control her fate. Emily was dragged through a long, dark hallway, flanked by cold concrete walls. She could feel the roughness of her captors, but she didn't resist. She needed to stay calm, observe, and find their weak points. The iron door in front of her opened with a deafening screech, and before her was an empty room, with only a wooden chair in the middle. A dim yellow light bulb hung from the ceiling, casting long, ominous shadows. They pushed her inside, and one of them chuckled. "Welcome to your new home, Emily." She didn't respond, just watched silently. One of the men took an iron chain from the corner of the room, tying her legs to the chair, while the other checked the ropes on her hands. When they were sure she couldn't escape, they turned and walked out. The iron door slammed shut, leaving Emily alone in the darkness. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Nathan and Margaret thought they had her cornered, but they were wrong. She didn't know how much time had passed. It could have been hours. It could have been all night. She had no watch, no natural light to tell the time. She was exhausted, but her mind was clear. Suddenly, she heard footsteps outside the door. She raised her head, her body tensing. The door slowly opened, and Nathan walked in, holding a glass of wine in his hand. He looked at her with interest. "It seems you haven't collapsed yet." Emily didn't answer, just stared at him. Nathan smiled faintly, placing the glass on the table. "I wonder, how long do you think you can hold out? A day? 2 days?" Emily smiled faintly. "I'm stronger than you think, Nathan." He tilted his head, studying her. "I know, but everyone has their limits." He stepped closer, looking down at her. "You know what's funnier? I don't need to kill you to win. I just need to make you lose everything." Emily clenched her fists. "The Winters Company? I'll get it back," Nathan continued, his voice calm. "Your reputation? I'll destroy it. I'll make the world believe you're a fraud, a greedy servant who takes what doesn't belong to you." He sneered. "And when you have nothing left, when everyone turns their backs on you, I'll let you go. But you won't be Emily Carter anymore. You'll be a lost cause no one will remember." Emily looked him straight in the eye. "You can't win, Nathan," he laughed. "Is that so?" She gritted her teeth. "Because you're a fake, and sooner or later, everyone will know it." Nathan's smile disappeared. He grabbed her chin, forcing her to look him in the eye. "I warned you, Emily. You had your chance to leave here, and you refused. Now, don't blame me." He released her, straightening up. "I'll leave you here to think about your dark future." He turned and walked out of the room, leaving her alone in the darkness. Emily sat in the dark, the minutes ticking by like torture. But instead of panicking, she used the time to think. They could tie her hands and feet, but they couldn't control her will. She began to test the ropes around her wrists. They were tight, but not impossible to loosen if she found the right weak spot. She tried to move gently, inch by inch, to avoid breaking the skin. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Emily stopped immediately, holding her position as if she had accepted her fate. The door opened, and this time it was not Nathan but one of his henchmen, a large man with cold eyes. He entered, holding a tray of food and a bottle of water. "Food for you," he said, his voice dry. Emily didn't answer, just stared at him as he set the tray on the floor. He was about to turn away when Emily spoke, her voice weak but calculating. "What do you think you'll get out of working for them?" He paused. "Do you think Margaret and Nathan will protect you when it's all over?" Emily continued, her eyes fixed on him. "I've seen it happen many times. The ones who do the dirty work are always the first to be thrown out." He turned, staring at her. "I can help you," Emily whispered, her voice full of conviction. "If you let me go, I'll make sure you have a way out when Nathan and Margaret fall." He frowned, clearly wavering, but then he shook his head. "I can't." He turned and walked out, and closed the door, leaving Emily alone. She closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. She had planted the seed of doubt. Now, she just had to wait for it to sprout. Midnight. A rattle sounded outside the door. Emily opened her eyes, waiting tensely. The door opened, and the man from earlier entered, this time carrying not food, but a knife. He stared at her for a long moment before stepping closer and cutting the ropes around her hands. Emily didn't ask, didn't say anything. She just looked at him with silent gratitude, then quickly rubbed her numb wrists. "Go before I change my mind," he whispered, his eyes darting out into the hallway. Emily nodded, her heart pounding as she stood. Emily kept as calm as she could as she walked out of the dark room, following the man who had freed her. He didn't say anything more, just motioned for her to follow. The hallway was long and narrow, dim lights casting a shadow over the cold concrete walls. He stopped in front of a metal door. "Out this way. But once you're out here, I can't help you anymore," he whispered. Emily looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You don't have to do this." He curled his lips, shaking his head. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for myself. Nathan and Margaret wouldn't let me live if this got out." Emily didn't say anything more, just nodded before carefully opening the door. Outside was a dark courtyard, a car parked in the far corner. Her heart pounded as she realized this was her only chance of escape. She turned to look at him one last time. "Thank you." He didn't answer, just stood there, his face tense. "Go, before anyone finds out." Emily didn't hesitate any longer. She ducked low, running as fast as she could across the yard, her heart pounding in her chest. When she reached the car, she tried to open the door, but it was locked. She cursed under her breath, scanning her eyes for another way. Just then, she heard a voice coming from the direction of the building. A rat just escaped from its cage. Nathan's voice. Emily spun around, seeing him standing on the steps, his eyes blazing in the darkness. Behind him were two burly men, all three of them staring at her. Emily didn't think any further. She ran. Footsteps echoed behind her, Nathan and his men hot on her heels. She ran across an empty lot, breathing heavily, her heart pounding. She needed an escape. Oh! Ahead, a tall iron fence blocked her path. Emily gritted her teeth, having no other choice. She gathered all her strength, gripping the bars and climbing, her fingers holding on tight, even though her palms were bleeding from the sharp metal. "Don't let it escape!" Nathan shouted. Emily climbed faster. Just as she swung herself over the top of the fence, a hand grabbed her ankle. "You think you can escape?" Nathan's voice echoed from below. Emily kicked hard, her foot hitting his face, causing him to let go. She lost her balance, falling more than 2 meters to the ground. a sharp pain spreading throughout her body. But she didn't have time to complain. She jumped up and dashed, running as fast as she could into the darkness. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she had to survive. Nathan stood behind the fence, blood dripping from his lips. He gritted his teeth, his eyes filled with rage. "Trust me, Emily. You can run, but you can't hide forever." Emily ran through the night, breathing heavily, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know how far she had run, only that every step she took could be Nathan and his men behind her. The dense canopy of trees covered the rough dirt road, the faint moonlight passing through the leaves, creating shimmering streaks of light. She knew she couldn't run forever. She needed a place to hide, a place to pause and plan a counterattack. Up ahead, an old wooden house appeared in the middle of the woods. It could be a safe place or a trap, but she had no choice. She rushed inside, closed the door tightly, and leaned against it, trying to regulate her breathing. The house was dark, only the moonlight filtering through the torn curtains. Dust covered the floor and old furniture, proving that this place had been abandoned for a long time. Emily carefully walked to the window, gently pulled the curtain, and looked out. No one. But she knew Nathan wouldn't give up easily. Suddenly, the phone in her pocket vibrated. She jumped, pulling it out to look at the screen. An unknown number. Her hand shook as she pressed the answer button. "Emily!" A low voice rang out from the other end. She tightened her grip on the phone. "Who is it?" A faint laugh rang out. "You think you can escape me that easily?" "Nathan." Emily held her breath, gripping the phone tighter. "You can hide in the dark as long as you want, but you know I will always find you," he continued, his voice calm but menacing. Emily bit her lip, trying to keep her composure. "What do you want, Nathan?" "I want everything I've lost," he growled. "I want you on your knees, begging for my forgiveness. I want you to realize that you never belonged in this world." Emily closed her eyes, trying not to let her emotions get the better of her. "You think I'll give up?" Nathan chuckled. "No, Emily, I think you'll fight. And I like this game." There was a beep as he hung up. Emily threw the phone down on the table, trying to stop the panic that was rising. Nathan didn't just want her gone. He wanted to destroy her completely. She couldn't let him win. She had to fight back. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight crept through the window, Emily had a plan. She couldn't run forever. She had to confront Nathan. She had to take back what was hers. Emily had no choice but to strike before she was cornered. Not only did she have to escape Nathan, but she also had to expose him and Margaret before they could destroy her completely. She took a deep breath, straightened her dusty coat, and left the cabin. She needed an ally, and there was only one person she could trust right now, Daniel. Her phone had been tapped by Nathan, and she couldn't contact him directly. So she decided to go to Daniel's law office, knowing that it was the safest place she could find. 30 minutes later, Emily stopped in front of the high-rise building where Daniel worked. She pulled up the hood of her coat, keeping her head down to avoid being recognized. When she entered the lobby, she quickly headed straight for the elevator, her heart pounding as she thought about what she was about to say to him. When the elevator doors opened on Daniel's floor, she rushed to his office. She pushed the door open without knocking, and Daniel looked up, his eyes widening at the sight of her. "Emily?" He jumped to his feet, walking quickly toward her. "Jesus, are you okay? I've been trying to call you all night." Emily shook her head, her voice shaking but determined. "Daniel, I don't have much time. Nathan kidnapped me. He wants to destroy me, and I know he's planning something bigger." Daniel frowned, his hands gripping her shoulders reassuringly. "Fuck, are you hurt?" She shook her head. "I'm fine, But he's not stopping, Daniel. I need to expose him right now. Daniel took a deep breath, pulling her back into the chair. Okay. Tell me everything that happened. Emily told him everything. The kidnapping, what Nathan said about her mother, his scheme. By the time she was finished, Daniel was dead serious. We need proof, he said, standing up and pacing the room. We need something to force Nathan and Margaret to come out. Emily narrowed her eyes. He has a secret account. I heard Daniel say he's been moving money overseas. If we can find proof of that, we can take him down. Daniel nodded, his eyes flashing sharply. I have a friend who works in a bank. If we can get his account information, we can prove he's a financial fraud. But it's dangerous. Emily clenched her fists. I have no choice. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, then we'll do this my way. That evening, Emily and Daniel were in the car, parked not far from Nathan's house. They had a plan. Daniel would hack into the bank system to get the account information, while Emily would find a way into Nathan's house to collect any important documents. Are you sure about this? Daniel asked again, his eyes worried. Emily nodded. I can't let him keep controlling everything. Daniel took a deep breath. Okay, but be careful. Emily opened the car door, slid out, and quietly headed toward Nathan's mansion. She snuck in from the back, avoiding the surveillance cameras. The house was eerily quiet. She knew Nathan wasn't there. He was at a fancy party with his shareholders, which gave her time to act. She rummaged through his office, looking for any documents related to money laundering. After a few minutes, she found a file, a document detailing large sums of money being transferred to an anonymous offshore account. Here it is, she whispered, pulling out her phone and snapping a picture of it all. Just then, she heard footsteps. She froze. Someone was there. She quickly slid behind the bookcase, keeping her breathing light. The door opened, and Margaret Winters walked in. She looked around, her eyes narrowing, as if sensing something was wrong. Emily held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She stood there for a long moment, then shook her head and turned to leave the room. Emily waited a few more seconds before stepping quietly out of her hiding place. She had what she needed. Now, she had to leave before it was too late. Emily forced herself to stay calm as she stepped out of Nathan's office, each step careful to avoid making any noise. She knew Margaret was still in the house, and one misstep would get her caught. She threaded her way down the long hallway, trying to remember which way she'd come in through the back door. But as she reached the corner of the stairs, she heard the click of high heels. Margaret was back. Her heart pounded. If she ran now, she would surely hear. If she stood still, she'd be found. With no other choice, Emily quickly slipped through a nearby door and closed it, trying to be absolutely silent. Outside, Margaret stopped. The heels stopped right in front of the door where Emily was hiding. She covered her mouth, trying to keep her rapid breathing quiet. I know someone's here. Margaret's voice rang out, cold as ice. Come out now, or I'll call security. Emily didn't move. There was a long pause. Then Margaret chuckled. Emily, if it's you, remember that you can't beat me. You may think you're out, but in reality, you're just playing a game I've set up. Emily clenched her fists. Margaret stood still for a few more seconds, then walked away, the sound of her shoes fading down the hallway. Emily waited a moment, then breathed a sigh of relief. She opened the door and slipped out, running as fast as she could toward the back door. She had just stepped out of the mansion, feeling the cold wind blow against her face, when suddenly a hand grabbed her wrist. She turned around in shock, but immediately breathed a sigh of relief. It was Daniel. Go, he whispered, pulling her quickly away. The two of them rushed toward the car parked nearby. Daniel stepped on the gas as soon as Emily closed the door, the tires screeching against the road, speeding away before anyone could see. Emily leaned back in her seat, breathing heavily. She was out. But she knew the fight wasn't over. She looked at Daniel, her eyes shining with determination. "We have everything we need," she said, her voice more certain than ever. Daniel nodded, but there was still a hint of worry in his eyes. "Yeah, but Nathan isn't the type to let things end easily. He'll fight back." Emily clenched her fists. "If he wants to fight, I'll fight to the end." Daniel drove out of the villa at a fast but cautious pace. Emily turned her head to look out the window, seeing that Nathan's house was still lit. He would soon realize that the important documents had been stolen, and by then she would have no time to escape. Emily looked at the phone screen, where the photos of Nathan's shady dealings were clearly displayed. This was something that could destroy him, but it would be useless if she didn't know how to use it properly. Daniel tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his voice tense. "We need to get this evidence out there immediately, but we have to do it right, otherwise Nathan will turn the tables." Emily nodded, her eyes flashing with determination. "I won't give him a chance to counterattack." Daniel glanced at her. "Do you have a plan?" She took a deep breath. Nathan has always cared about his image in the financial and social world. If we release the evidence at the right time, in front of the most influential people, he won't have time to react. Daniel thought for a moment, then nodded. "A shareholder meeting." Emily smiled faintly. "Exactly. Winters Enterprises has an important meeting tomorrow to announce new financial plans. Nathan will be there, and we will expose him right there." Daniel tapped his fingers on the steering wheel. "It's dangerous, Emily. If Nathan finds out about this plan, he will do everything he can to stop you." She looked straight into his eyes. "I don't care. This is my only chance." Daniel sighed, but his eyes showed admiration for her courage. "Then we will do it perfectly." The next morning, Emily put on her most powerful outfit, a tight black suit, high heels, and her hair pulled back into a bun. She needed to appear powerful, not like a girl who had just escaped a kidnapping. She walked into the Winters Enterprises building, where the shareholders' meeting was about to take place. No one in the room knew what was about to happen, except Nathan. He was already there, sitting in the center of the room with a smug smile on his face. But when he saw Emily enter, he paused. Their eyes met. Nathan narrowed his eyes, but quickly regained his composure. "I didn't think you had the guts to come here today, Emily." She smirked, taking the seat across from him. "I won't miss this moment." Margaret was there too, and when she saw Emily, her eyes darkened. The meeting began, and the shareholders reported on their financial situation. Everything seemed normal, but Emily knew that the real storm was coming. Nathan stood up to speak, and he began to introduce the company's investment plans. The room was silent. Everyone listened with absolute attention. And that's when Emily made her move. She gently turned on her phone, connecting it to the large screen in the conference room, where all the shareholders were watching the presentation. Boom! Nathan's money laundering documents appeared on the screen. Each number, each shady transaction. The room was completely silent. Nathan froze, his face pale. An older shareholder stood up, his voice cold. "Nathan, what is this?" Emily stood up, slowly walking forward. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you are seeing on the screen is evidence of Nathan Winters' financial fraud. He laundered money through the company, deceived shareholders, and damaged the reputation of Winters Enterprises." Nathan slammed his hand on the table, his eyes flashing. "You're making things up. These are fake documents." Emily held her gaze, unwavering. "Really? If that's the case, then you wouldn't mind letting an independent investigation check it out? All eyes in the room turned to Nathan. Some shareholders began to whisper. Some looked at him with suspicion. Margaret clenched her fists, her face pale. Daniel stood up, his voice loud. I've sent all this evidence to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Financial Police. If anyone wants to verify the authenticity, they can investigate it themselves. The silence in the room stretched on ominously. Nathan gritted his teeth, then let out a cold laugh. Do you think you can take me down with just these documents? I have power. I have connections. No one can touch me. Emily stepped closer to him, leaning close to his ear, her voice whispering but authoritative. You've lost, Nathan. Just then, the door to the conference room opened. 2 police officers walked in. Nathan Winters, you're under arrest for financial fraud, money laundering, and forgery. The room exploded in chatter. Nathan struggled as the police handcuffed him. Emily, I won't let you go, I swear. She just looked at him with sharp eyes. Goodbye, Nathan. Margaret stood up, but before she could say anything, another officer came forward. Ms. Margaret Winters, you're also under arrest for conspiracy and participation in illegal activities. Margaret paled. No, this is a mistake. But the police didn't give her a chance to fight back. Emily crossed her arms and watched the Winters' mother and daughter being taken away. Relief filled her chest. Finally, this nightmare was over. Daniel stepped closer to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. You did it. She turned to him, smiling with relief. No, we did it. The conference room was still in chaos, but Emily didn't care anymore. She had it all back. She had won. And this time, no one could take it away from her. From Maid to Mistress is not only a story about revenge or a struggle for power, but also a journey to overcome fate of a woman who dares to stand up to protect herself. The story emphasizes 3 main messages. Justice always wins. No matter how powerful and cunning Nathan and Margaret are, the truth will eventually be revealed. Those who are deceitful, greedy, and take advantage of others for personal gain will not be able to escape the consequences forever. Perseverance and courage can change fate. Emily started from zero, just a girl who was despised and treated like a servant. But she did not let circumstances determine her life. She learned to fight, used her intelligence and courage to stand up, and finally took back what was rightfully hers. Trust and companionship are more important than power. Throughout the fight, Emily was not alone. She has Daniel, who is always there for her, even when everything seems to be against her. This shows that sometimes victory doesn't come from fighting alone, but from knowing how to trust and rely on those who deserve it. If you are interested in this dramatic story, please help me spread it to more people. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss out on the next exciting stories. Comment below with your thoughts. Which plot impressed you the most? If you were Emily, what would you do differently? What stories would you like to see in the future? Thank you for accompanying me until the end. Please share this story with those who like the genre of mind games, revenge, and strong female leads. Blast off.